There's some interesting facts about Bethlehem. Bethlehem is about 5 miles south of Jerusalem. If you go there today, it is a walled city. It is actually not in Israel. It is actually considered part of Palestine. It is a Palestinian town. It is a walled city. Israel put a wall around it because that's where a lot of the people, when Israel became a nation, the Palestinian refugees fled to Bethlehem, and there are still some that are living in refugee camps from the time, and they starve. It's a walled city. It's hard to get in and out of if you are Palestinian, and most Jews would not go there, and sometimes they don't even allow some of the tourists to go there. But at the time of Jesus, it was not a walled city. It was about 5 miles south of Jerusalem. There was probably between 300 and 1,000 people there. Not a big town. Not a big town. But we see in Micah, it's called, "O you Bethlehem Ephrathah." So we wonder, what does Ephrathah mean? Ephrathah means house of bread. And I start to look at that and I start to think, wow, house of bread. It's called because it was a place where there was a lot of fields. There was a lot of grain grown there. But it was a house of bread. And I start to think, what does that have to do with Jesus? How would that affect Jesus? And I started thinking, well, Jesus himself says in John 6:35, he said, "I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me shall not hunger, and whoever believes in me shall never thirst." So we have this place where Jesus is born called the house of bread. And we have Jesus saying, "I am the bread of life." It is first mentioned in Genesis 35:16 through 20. Very sad story. Genesis 35:16 through 20 says, Then they journeyed from Bethel. And this is whose journeying is. It is Jacob and his clan, his whole house. Okay? And this is after Joseph and his brothers were born. The only one who hadn't been born yet is Benjamin. And when they were still some distance from Ephrath, which again is Bethlehem, Rachel went into labor, and she had hard labor. And when her labor was at its hardest, the midwife said to her, "Do not fear, for you have another son." This is Benjamin being born. Joseph from the Old Testament, who was sold into slavery in Egypt, his brother. And as her soul was departing, for she was dying, she called his name Ben-Oni. But his father called him Benjamin. So Rachel died, and she was buried on the way to Ephrath, that is Bethlehem. And Jacob set up a pillar over her tomb. It is the pillar of Rachel's tomb, which is there to this day. Now, first of all, it's probably not there now. It was at the time of this writing, it was there. So they knew it. They knew where it was. Rachel's dying. She's giving birth to Benjamin, and she's dying. And she calls him Ben-Oni or Ben-Onai. Because Ben-Onai means son of sorrow. She was at this time of joy, this time of great joy of having another son, because she only had Joseph. At this time, she is dying, and she is not going to get to see her son grow up. So she calls him that, but Jacob calls him Benjamin. So what does that have to do with Jesus? Where we're born does have a tendency to have an effect on us. We can see the correlation here if we go to Isaiah 53:3. Another prophecy about Jesus, not his birth, but of a later time in his life. It says, "He was despised and rejected by men. He was a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. And as one from whom men hide their faces, he was despised, and we esteemed him not." Jesus is called by Isaiah a man of sorrows. He was born in Bethlehem, where it was considered sometimes a place of sorrow because Rachel died there. In 1 Samuel 16, Bethlehem is a place where David was anointed king. It's a king's town. David is anointed there, king. In Ruth 4:11, Ruth finds Bethlehem a place of love. It's where she finds her love. In 2 Samuel 23, David longs for a drink from the well there. And if you know that story, it's interesting. He's in his, I don't know whether he was delirious or whether he is just like, I just wish I could have a drink from the well at Bethlehem. And some of his men overhear it. And what do? They take and they go and they fight to get into the town. And they take some water from the well and they bring it back to him. And what does he do? He pours it out. He says, how dare I drink? Because these men have done so much valor of going and fighting for something. I can't drink it. It was so important to David. The town was. What's interesting is, as we saw in John, is that Jesus said he's also the living water. In John 4:10 says, Jesus answered her, if you knew the gift of God and who it is that's saying to you, give me a drink, you would ask him and he would have given you living water. He's talking to the woman at the well in Samaria. And he says, get me a drink. And she's flabbergasted. He's talking to her. And he's telling her, if you knew who I was, you would ask me for water because I am living water.